What is up, YouTube? Crafting Cars here. Happy Tuesday. Now in today's video, I'm going to be walking you through how I set up my base tune on my 97 Civic out there using my OBD1 P28 ECU and the Hondata smanager software I got loaded up on my desktop here. Basically what I'm going to do today is run you through the entire program for this smanager software, going through all the parameters and everything like that, and just kind of getting it set up so I can load a new calibration file from my desktop to my laptop, take my laptop out to my car, plug it into my ECU, and hopefully start that bitch up. So let's load into this program here and get right into it. Alright, so when you open up the program, Hondata smanager, this is the first screen it's going to take you to, and we're going to go ahead to new calibration. And Hondata supplies you a whole list of similar setups to what you could possibly be running. And it looks like the closest thing to our setup will be this one right here, which is a B16 motor with a Garret turbo. I'm running a B16 with a Garret turbo, so it's pretty close. So I think that's going to get us started in the right direction. So I'll go ahead and click OK there. And it takes us right to what is called a fuel map. And basically this is it looks kind of like an Excel spreadsheet where you can go and edit any of these cells here. So any of these are editable, and it'll show you exactly where it pops up on the graph versus this 3D display or 2D display, depending on how you want to look at it. And you'll see the variables here. The only things that change are the RPM. So as you rev up, you go from like 500 to 800 RPM. And then across the top axis here, this is actually pressure. So you can tune your car a couple different ways. The way I get mine tuned is manifold pressure. So what the air pressure is, PSI rating in the actual intake manifold versus RPM. So when you're idling, you're more around like here. So like around, yeah, I say idle, you're anywhere from like 650 to 1000 RPM. You're just basically right in the corner there. And this is kind of the most important part to tune when you first start your car. Now, they've got low speed and high speed fuel tables. Low speeds for when you're not in VTEC and high speeds for when you're in VTEC. We're really only gonna have to mess with low speed on the first startup. And they also have the same thing for ignition timing. Now, when you load up a base map, it keeps everything on the safe side. So that means that you'll be running a little bit extra fuel and a little bit retarded timing, and that's just gonna keep you from detonating and leaning out, because that's, you know, kind of like one of the worst things that can happen when you first start your motor. So we're not gonna touch the tables yet until we get in the car. Let's move on to the parameters. So we'll start in the top left corner, analog inputs. This is basically if you have any other buttons, knobs, or anything like that hooked up to your ECU with an extra set of wires, you can adjust this here. I'm not doing any of that stuff. Boost control tab. This is for if you electronically control your boost control. I've always used a manual boost controller, so I won't be using this as well. All right, now boost cut. I do want to use this, especially for like the first couple drives. So basically this is like if your engine sees that, or if your manifold absolute pressure sensor sees that you're running like anything over 10 PSI, it'll be like, oh, nope, you're gonna blow up the engine, cut. And it'll cut ignition timing or cut power or cut fuel or anything like that, just to kind of get you back in your place. It'll kind of seem like the engine's dying on you and then coming back. We can probably leave, at least for our first drive, we should leave it around like 5 PSI, and that's both hot and cold. We don't want like our first couple drives, we're not gonna be getting into boost at all, let alone VTEC. So we're gonna move on to the closed loop system here. So this tab is basically talking about your oxygen sensor, what you're running for your oxygen sensor setup. So here it says stock sensor, we're not running that. We're running an open loop setup, which basically means tied into my ECU harness, I have 0 oxygen sensors. But what I do have is a AAM wideband, and that has nothing to do with the ECU. I just watch that while I tune my car. They don't talk to each other at all, which has its advantages and disadvantages. So that means I can disable the O2 heater here and move on to the next category. So closed loop advanced. This isn't, like I said, don't have my wideband plugged in to my ECU, so don't have to touch this. This is for digital inputs and outputs that you hook up. Don't have any of this either. Flex fuel. So if I was running E85 or wanted to adjust my tune accordingly based on what kind of gas I put in the vehicle, this is where I'd be messing with that. But I'm not running E85, and I usually tune my car just straight up 91 octane, 10% ethanol, which is the most common gas you can find around here in Minnesota. Fuel compensation. Don't have to touch any of this yet. Fuel injectors. All right. So here we can enter in, so the stock injector size for B16, yeah, it must be right around 240. Current injector size, we're gonna go ahead and change that to 750. And the next thing you wanna select is your injector dead time. Now, I like this because I can load up it basically quick selects it for me. So I'm running RC 750 injectors here, click OK, and it automatically adjusts the dead time. So I don't have to look into that at all, which is super helpful. Thanks, Hondata. Moving on, fuel trim. I'm not gonna touch any of this yet. Full throttle shift, ain't gonna touch any of this yet. The full throttle shift's kind of cool. It basically allows you to have your foot matted to the floor, press the clutch, shift the gear, let off the clutch, and you don't have to touch the gas pedal the whole time. You stay in it, which is super good for like drag racing and stuff. We're not gonna mess with that yet. Gear compensation, this will adjust how much fuel your ECU is giving you based on what gear you're in. Don't have to touch that. Idle, I usually like to set my minimum idle speed to around 800 RPM. Doesn't really matter. And then the idle air control duty cycle. This is basically how fast your idle air controller responds. So first of all, idle air controller, it adjusts your idle based on your coolant temperature, or kind of like the outside temperature. And basically, if you have like air bubbles running through it, you'll have that thing hunting up and down all day long. I just like to keep it in the normal section. That keeps it pretty easy. Once you bleed your cooling system, everything runs fine if you leave it in the normal, at least in my experience. Ignition compensation, not gonna touch that. Launch control, not gonna touch that yet, but I do like messing around with that. On my old setup, I had launch control and that was a lot of fun. All right, map sensor, we're gonna mess with this here. So I'm not running a stock map sensor, I'm running a replacement. And another quick select one here, I'm running the Hondata / OmniPower 4-bar map sensor. Now I actually go out, like I know about this program, so I find the quick select options and I will go out and I'll buy whatever the quick select option is, just so I don't have to mess with it, just to make my life easier. Because I don't want to look up how to enter the scaler or the offset or anything like that. That's way over my head. All right, going to the miscellaneous tab here. Some of these things like knock sensors disabled, electrical load detectors disabled, that's all good. Barometric pressure sensor, that's disabled. So yeah, all that stuff, that's already set up good for me here. So here we have nitrous, auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, and auxiliary 3. This is if you have like staged nitrous system. I'm not running any nitrous, so just brush over this. Notes. So this is where you can kind of put in, this is usually where tuners put in like the notes for their ECU here. So I could put in like Civic, turbocharged, running blocks cams. I don't know the header, but we could say it's a B16 A3 with a, let's see, Garret turbo. Yeah, whatever, B16, whatever. Intake, K&N, exhaust, vibrates. All right, that stuff really doesn't matter. Onboard data logging. So we can enable this right now. I won't be using it right now for like the first couple startups, but when you're doing your street tune, data logging, but when you're doing your street tune, data logging is pretty important, especially if you run into problems or something like that. It really helps you diagnose that stuff. Now protection, very important to use protection. Lean protection, I'm not able to use, like I said, because my air-fuel ratio gauge is not hooked up to my ECU, so none of that bothers me. But my overheating temperature, I'll set that at 212 degrees. Basically, it's like if your coolant reaches 212 degrees, it'll turn on your check engine light saying, okay, stop driving your car, check it out, you may be overheating. Radiator fan control, I'm just gonna put this at 190. I like to keep it a little cooler. And the maximum vehicle speed, basically like if you're going over 30 miles per hour, there's no need to turn your radiator fan on, so it'll just disable that. Rev limits, looks like it's got it right around 8,500 for every gear. That's perfectly fine for now. Not gonna touch this. Secondary tables, this is where if you're running like different maps, not gonna touch this either. Security, this is like setting up valet keys and stuff like that. Not important to me. Shift light, not gonna touch this yet. Traction control, not gonna touch this. Throttle position sensor, so I select map-based index, basically tuning off the manifold pressure instead of tuning based off your throttle position sensor. The only people out there that really should be tuning off throttle position sensor are people who don't run an idle air control valve or people who run individual throttle bodies, which I'm not at that level yet. And another cool thing on the throttle position sensor page is you can go in and tune your gas pedal so it knows like when it's at 0% and when you're foot to the floor. It's good to get that dialed in, you know, for really good throttle control. TPS ignition, don't have to touch any of this. This is basically just like blipping the gas and doing stuff while you're shifting. It'll adjust like timing and stuff like that. It can help you get a fireball if you want to set that up. VTEC, the most important tab here. So I can go ahead and disable the VTEC oil pressure switch. I deleted that, not in my harness or anything like that. Still want to enable VTEC. I'm not going to touch where VTEC engages or the minimum throttle speed or temperature. That's all stock and that's all important, so I'm just going to leave that like that. And we'll move on to the sensor tab. So this shows all the sensors. A lot of times on the first start, I like to have this page open just so I can monitor everything at once. This display tab, you can basically make your own custom display. Some people that have like a tablet and they'll customize this page here to read just everything they want, and they'll put it up on their dash and that'll be their gauge cluster. And here's graphing for data logging. Here's a page where you can see your area codes. Vault, where you can put in more information about your car, and then traction control, which we're not going to mess with. So that's basically everything. I went through that pretty fast, but it's really pretty simple for at least the first startup before you really start messing with stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this program here, load it onto my laptop, and we're gonna go out to the car, plug everything in, get it all ready, and turn that key. And obviously it's gonna start up first try, so. All right, so if you sat through all that, I really appreciate it. The watch time helps our channel. If not, I completely understand because that stuff gets pretty boring sometimes. Want to let you know that after my last video where I was working on the Civic, I went ahead, bled the clutch line, and I pressure tested the cooling system, and I noticed I had a couple leaks. It was actually a real, kind of a bitch to diagnose, and I was kind of scared I might have had a blown head gasket at first, but turned out one of my gaskets on my idle air control valve was leaking. Sealed that up, and I also cranked it a couple times just to make sure I had oil pressure and everything was good. But here goes the first start, run, warm up, and we'll see how everything goes. And say our prayers. I got my laptop plugged in here, so I'll turn this on. I got the smanager software up here. I think I'll just start by looking at the sensor tab. Put the key in. Obviously my ignition's on. Now I'm priming the fuel pump, getting the oil circulated with my oil pump there. Smooth now, guys. So I finally got her up to temp. Air fuel ratio is hanging around 13, high 12s, which is pretty rich, but it's okay for now. Oil pressure still looking healthy. Warmed up around 45, 50 pounds. Engine sounds healthy. Doesn't look like we got any leaks yet. The floor is wet because I just cleaned it today. Exhaust is going. Less smoky because of how rich it is, but sounds pretty good. Oh man, I can't believe she's running. Alright, so as you can see, not only did the car start, but it's idling pretty well, at least for a initial tune like that. A couple more things I want to do before I can get it on the road. I got to tighten down the axle nuts, throw the wheels on, I want to clean it, adjust the tune a little bit more, especially the ignition timing with the distributor. And yeah, but this is a very, very, very exciting point in the video series here. I mean, this is kind of, it's not the end, obviously. I've still got to drive the thing, and I got a whole bunch more modifications I want to do to it. But if you've been, you know, following the build, I'd like to thank you guys. I love reading your guys' comments, especially the ones where you say it's like a big influence or big motivation. That's super cool to hear. And yeah, I'm no professional car builder. I'm just an amateur 21-year-old, and I could do it, you could do it. So don't forget that. And yeah, thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time. See you on Friday. Gideon's been working on that go-kart, so I recommend that you follow that build as well. And yeah, until then, bye.